Hi.
Hey, Troy, how you doing?
I had this really interesting question about Pascal's wager. Okay. So Pascal's wager is basically your like catch all end all like deathbed confession, right? But I believe in the Dillahunt wager. If you spend your whole life trying to find out what God's about and what's going to please him, why shouldn't you be admitted into heaven?
Well, that's a good question. It depends on the Christian you ask. Paul, do you have a take on this?
I'm confused, Troy, as to what exactly your wager is at that point. Like, you're just basically saying that you,
Well,
based on
Pascal's
your own
wager is kind
standard.
of
Go ahead, please.
Pascal's wager to me is like skimming the vat. Like okay, so I don't know about any of these gods, so I'm just going to say Hare Hare Krishna or praise Jesus or whatever. But I feel like the more diligent, more accurate way of dealing with things would be to do the due diligence. So I feel like if I were to wind up, I don't know, at the pearly gates, and there's the book of life there, and they were trying to judge me, and I said, well, I spent my whole life trying to figure out exactly how to praise God, and I couldn't find any good evidence. They would at least weigh that due diligence against my inability to find good evidence.
So let me try to maybe rephrase this so that see if we're on the same page here. So with Pascal's wager, the whole idea is the rewards are infinite and the punishment is infinite if you choose wrong. If God is real, if God isn't real, then the rewards are finite or non-existent, and also the punishments are also finite, non-existent. So you might as well just believe. You might as well just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to wager on belief.
Yeah, but then you wind up in Bertrand Russell's. Russell's. You're bound to be wrong 999 times out of 1,000.
Well, that's one of the big issues with Pascal's wager is that it makes the massive assumption at the beginning that it's the Christian God, that it's the God that's doing the judging. When you're saying the Dillahunt wager, you're basically saying that you can replace belief with just earnest seeking and then reap the same rewards. Is that what you're basically getting at?
Yeah, I don't see why earnest seeking would weigh less than faith if placed on the scales.
Well, like I said, that it really comes down to the Christian you talk to, because every Christian's idea of a God is going to be slightly different. And then you might have two Christians' idea of a God is massively different. You're going to have the Calvinist who thinks that everyone's just pre-selected and doesn't matter. You're going to have the Christian who thinks that faith above works is what matters. You're the Christian who thinks that works above faith is what matters. And honestly, until a God appears and or somehow accurately communicates his criteria for salvation, then I don't see how this wager, if you can really call it that, is really worth anything.
Like, Troy, I think you would agree that it really doesn't matter what we think the criteria should be, or what any Christian or Buddhist or Muslim, doesn't matter what a human says the judgment rules are. If there's a judgment day with a fail pass system, I think you would agree that whatever we think the criteria should be is irrelevant. So we may all agree, the three of us could agree, hey, earnest seeking is a great criteria, but maybe the God, if the God has a different criteria, it doesn't matter what we think the criteria should be. Does that make sense, Troy?
Yeah, I guess you'd have to define God and define the ontology of God before you really understood what his criteria were.
Well,
but what you're trying to say, Paul?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is until we show up on that day, there's actually no way for us to be confident about what the criteria is going to be. And that is actually, I think we would all three of us also agree, that's an incredible flaw that if you're playing any game and you don't know what the rules are of the game you're playing, you're not destined to do that well at the game, right?
So that for them to say that you're going to play this game, but we're only going to tell you what the rules are after it's over.
Right,
That seems
exactly.
kind
That's
of
exactly the situation
disingenuous.
we're in. But I think you'd still have to agree that even if we all just, maybe at the end of the game you discover that whoever has the most bananas on their head is the winner, and we're like, well, no one even talked about bananas. Like, but that doesn't matter because it's the person who's arbitrary. It's the entity that's making the arbitrary rules. And so I would be, if there is a God and there's Judgment Day, I would agree with you. I will be excited if credulity is punished, right? Like that actually, like that earnest seeking, as you said, if that is rewarded, we're all in good shape. And there's probably a lot of Christians who are in good shape too because they earnestly sought, and so that'd be great. I agree with you. The trick is, and that was why I was asking about the wager part, is that because we don't know what the rules are, that's where that's why it's called a wager in my view. We're just guessing. As you said, it's 1 out of 10,000. It's probably, or 1 out of 1,000. It's probably closer to 1 out of a billion. Because again, it might be who owned the most dogs. It gets into heaven. Like, we don't know.
Yeah, most dogs, right?
And if it is in some way true that we are made in this God's image, whether that God be Christian or not, if we're made in that God's image and our morals are somewhat loosely aligned, I can't possibly imagine punishing somebody for trying their hardest and working with incomplete information. And a person who has incomplete information, they try their hardest, yet they still come to a false conclusion. I can't imagine punishing a person for doing their best and failing. In fact,
well, yeah, and I'm a secular humanist, I'm a skeptic, and I love to be proven wrong about stuff. And it just seems like okay, if I'm doing my earnest best to try and learn the best knowledge about the best of this theist creation, and I still fail at it, then why should I be burned in a lake of fire forever?
Yeah, and I even go a step further, and I say that if I had, sorry, Paul, if I had two choices if I have two choices of people in front of me, and let's say I'm God for a moment, I'm judging people. I have a person who believed in me against their logic, their evidence, and their rational thinking, and they essentially force themselves to believe, if such a thing is possible. Let's assume for a moment it is. If such a thing is possible, to force belief despite contradictory evidence, despite bad evidence, and this individual believes because they fear punishment from me, that's one person. And then I have another person who doesn't believe because that's what they honestly think. And they do that in spite of the threats of their fellow humans who happen to be religious, despite the threats of various holy books out there. An individual who says, despite all these threats, I'm going to stick with my intellectual integrity and I'm not going to believe until there's good evidence. If I was God and I was looking at these two individuals, I would value the individual who was being honest with themselves despite the threats, rather than, as Paul says, the credulous one who's going to believe out of fear of reprisals for me, fear out of reprisals from their fellow man. I know who I would value more. And that's the only if I had those two choices. I wouldn't punish anybody internally because I think that's just immoral to begin with. But does that answer your question, Troy?
I think due diligence is due.
Yeah, I think. Well, yeah, and that's the thing too.
It shouldn't be criticized.
That's the thing though. Like, is due diligence really due? That actually raises a good question. Like, do we have to do due diligence when it comes to vampires or unicorns or leprechauns? Like, we're religious folks are positing things that are outside of the natural world, things that cannot be demonstrated. The only evidence of which we have is personal experience, ancient dusty holy books, and contradictory claims. Like,
right.
That's the same thing we have for vampires.
And I can give a little bit of merit to each of those, like at varying degrees. But at the end of the day, what do you believe, and why should I believe it?
Sure, but with the question of due diligence, like, is the question of God even really deserving of any due diligence? I don't know. I can't really answer that question. But if you look at these competing claims of the supernatural, whether it be God or those other things that I mentioned, and ask yourself, how similar is the evidence for these things? What commonalities do we have when it comes to having lack of evidence or bad evidence or contradictory claims? does it really deserve due diligence? And like I said, I don't know. That's really up to the person to determine that. If there's a person out there who says, I really need to know whether there's vampires that exist, and I'm going to really look into this, and that's their kind of, personal truth or their personal drive, go for it. I might think it's a waste of time, but hey, at least they're following their intellect, and they're being honest about things because they really take the vampire question seriously. And if an individual, on the flip side, if somebody says, no, I don't care about vampires, I'm one of them, I don't care about vampires other than watching them in games or movies, um, I'm going to say fine to that too. And on the flip side, with the God question, if somebody says, hey, I'm going to do my due diligence, I feel I owe it to something, myself, the world, people, or a God if it actually exists, I say go for it. I'm one of them. I think I probably safely say Paul's one of them too. Like, if God exists and that God has a will for us, we want to know. We're going to be very skeptical about it. We're going
Right.
to ask for good information and evidence about it. But if there's a person who says, hey, I don't care if a God exists or not, I really just doesn't light up my brain like it should, all the power to them. Live your life, and who cares about due diligence when it
I
comes to
mean,
that question?
it's kind of tough in a world where you grew up reading the Bible and then you grew up selling crypto
Yeah.
on blockchain, and you're like, wow, you couldn't even keep a crypto wallet for your holy book, like.
That's
at
a good
least
point.
a
Yeah. Why wasn't
a
why wasn't the
chain
Bible
of
stored in the
progression.
blockchain? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it seems simple enough for a triomni god, right?
For those in the audience who aren't in the know, a blockchain is a relatively new computer science invention. Basically, keeps an immutable history of transactions, text, images. So yeah, if the Bible is written and put in the blockchain, who cares about translations and copies? We have it in the blockchain; it's immutable. So yeah, that would have been much
Right.
better.
Even if it started in Greek, you could still trace it back to the source.
Yeah,
That's right.
absolutely.
Oh
I
God,
think,
All right, Troy.
too many AI.
I just want
I've seen too many AIG videos where they have like one little tiny scrap of paper and like, this is the whole gospel.
I want to add, Troy, one last note of that. I think the immorality is not what God would arbitrarily choose to be the criteria. If there was a being that created the universe, I feel like it would be within their purview to set arbitrary standards, and that's fine. I think the immoral part is to not make it clear. If you
that just
because
seems,
you have 100
absurdly. That's
right.
That's like putting you on a putt-putt golf course and not giving you a putter. Like,
Yeah.
how are you supposed to do this? How are you supposed to solve this problem of knowing and learning about this with such insufficient tools?
Exactly. I agree. Thank you, Troy.
Isn't that
Well, that's awesome.
isn't
Thank
that
you
kind
so
of
much. I'm not going to take up any more time. I hope you guys get more Thea's callers. Thank you so much. You just totally made my day. Getting me on the line. Also, Jimmy, GFY, and Matt. Sorry I missed you earlier. I was at work, but you get homie.
All right, Troy. Thank you so much.
Bye.
I'm glad we could make Troy's day like that. That was a nice compliment. That warmed my heart. I never watched Saw, but I think I'm kind of familiar with the Saw idea. Like, you put a person in a room and you make them do like an impossible task, and if they fail, they die or somebody else dies. That's kind of with the golf analogy that Troy just used. It's kind of the same thing. Like, you put a human. Imagine putting a human on a. They never saw golf in their life. They have no idea what golf is. You put them in a putt course, give them a stick and a ball, and you say win or die. Well, what are the rules?
In
What
the
do
Saw
I do? Who am I
movies,
playing
though,
against?
I've not seen all of them by any stretch, but I've seen it's my understanding that there's at least a voiceover that actually does tell you, like, oh, you need to saw your leg off in order to get out. Like, there is actually very clear. It's not a reasonable request, but at least the request is clear.
Yeah.
So in that way, Saw is better than God. There's your clip.
Yeah. Shots fired, Christians. Call in and tell us why Saw is not better than God. That'd be a fun conversation. Okay. All right.